Good evening. I'm knocking out a few podcasts tonight. I just finished up the stress management and exercise expectations podcast, and I want to go into a little bit about injury in the event that you do run into an overuse injury or any sort of injury. I want to talk about that a little bit. There's a few things that have become pretty normalized. I think it's being overused, but it's become pretty normalized to have done when someone comes in or when someone goes to the primary care for an injury. The biggest thing, and I just actually talked about it with my newsletter that went out tonight, is imaging necessary for your injury? That is a very broad question to answer. It is a very tough question to answer, but I wanted to touch on it because we're in an opioid epidemic where doctors are now very cautious about prescribing pain medication, and rightfully so. It's not something that should just be handed out like hotcakes. It definitely people need to be smart about what they're taking. Folks who don't think that they have addictive personalities and then they end up being addicted to drugs, and now a couple years later they're having to go through rehab for it. Like it's something that can take hold, and it's the last thing that you really expected. I also think that we're in an imaging pandemic. Everybody wants an image. Everybody wants to know what's going on because we have the ability to take x-rays, CT scans, MRIs, all that stuff pretty much at our fingertips. You have to jump through a few insurance loops, but for the most part, a lot of people get imaging done. And in my opinion, and the research is agreeing with this, which is probably why my opinion is the way that it is, imaging is being overused. If you have an injury, you don't always need to see what's going on. And in fact, it's probably better that you don't see what's going on. In the last newsletter that I've just put out, I'm going to pull it up here real quick because I don't want to screw up the stats. All right. So in my last newsletter, I talked about sciatica again. I talked about imaging, and this led to this podcast being developed. With imaging, we are finding that when people have symptoms, what you see on an image doesn't necessarily always correlate with those symptoms. So you can have a bulging disc in your back, but that doesn't necessarily mean that bulging disc is causing what you are experiencing. As a therapist, I have spent more time interviewing people than doing tests anymore. I would say probably the last 2 years, I've started to get that way where I might take a half an hour, 40 minutes and talk to the person about what's going on versus 15 or 20 minutes and then jump right into testing. Oftentimes, you can get a lot out of a person. 80 to 85% of a physical therapist diagnosis comes from the subjective interview, like when we're talking back and forth. And then the objective measures, when we do tests and measures, it's just to confirm or deny what our hypotheses are. So when I start testing someone, like doing hands-on tests, I've already got an idea or a pretty solid idea as to what is going on. I'm just confirming and denying what is actually going on. Most healthcare providers, you don't have that kind of time. The shortest, or I'm a travel PT full-time yet. In my travels over the last 7.5, 8 years, the shortest amount of time I've had for an initial eval has been 30 minutes. The longest has been 60 minutes. You can get a lot done in 30 minutes if you have to, but 60 minutes is a very solid amount of time to really sit down and interview the person as to why they're coming in, what it's affecting, what is going on, and diving into those symptoms. Because I mean, I've been a patient before. It's you get in there and you go blank as to what you're experiencing, which sucks because you're trying to get help, but you can't remember because you're sitting there talking to the person, you're talking to the provider, and you can't remember exactly what's going on. But that time allows you, having that 60-minute time slot allows you to have a conversation and relax a little bit, and then more symptoms and more of what the patient is experiencing comes out. When that happens, again, I've got a pretty good idea before I even get my hands on the person what's going on. Because you can get a pretty good idea of whether or not the person does need an image. There are some states where PTs can order imaging, Wisconsin being one of them. And we're in a position as physical therapists to really be a good gatekeeper as to whether or not we think that that person needs an image. Here are some stats for you about low back pain. Around 30% of 20-year-olds have at least one bulging disc. That I did not know. Roughly 60% of 50-year-olds have at least one bulging disc. So over half of 50-year-olds have bulging discs. You don't see, I mean, think about all the 50-year-olds that you know, whether you're in your teens, 20s, 30s, or 40s listening to this, think about all the 50-year-olds that you know. And there's not a whole hell of a lot of them that are talking about having pain shooting down the back of their leg from a bulging disc. 52% of 30-year-olds have disc degeneration. I'll read that one again. 52% of 30-year-olds have disc degeneration. Degenerative disc disease is something that is very normal with aging. It is very common. It is the discs wear and tear. It's nothing to be concerned about really when someone's going in for a non-specific onset of back pain. To blame the disc degeneration on someone's back pain and just say, well, you're full of arthritis and your discs, like your disc space is narrow and and your discs are degenerating. Like that is so common with aging. It's like having gray hair as you get older. It's just part of it. You can still function just fine. You can still function pain-free with those things popping up on an MRI or on an X-ray. 88% of 60-year-olds have disc degeneration. So 9 out of 10 people that I'm going to see with low back pain, 60 plus, if I send them in for an image or if they have an image, it's going to pop up with this degeneration on the MRI report or X-ray report, one of the two. Again, don't get too, you don't need to get too riled up about disc degeneration popping up on your image results because it is very common with aging, because you do not see 88% of the population of people who are in their 60s pissing and moaning about low back pain. I think that gets a bad rep, and I think imaging is very overutilized. Now, if someone's having symptoms where you like it's not changing with any sort of movement, if it's not changing with activities around the house or with your hobbies, like there's really no, yeah, I do this and this makes it worse, or I do this and this makes it better, that might constitute imaging. Because again, you could have clots or tumors or something else that's going on that an image is going to be necessary to see. But in general, you can have a lot of these things popping up with your spine, arthritis, disc degeneration, bulging discs, and not have issues. All of these people were asymptomatic, mind you, in this study. Same thing with the knees. In this particular study, there were 230 knees examined. 97% of these knees imaged showed abnormalities of some kind. The average age for this was 44 years old, and they didn't have any symptoms. So you can have a lot of wear and tear on the knee, but not have issues. I just started to use the analogy this week, actually, with some patients about a road, because there's a lot of construction going on in this town that I'm working in. 3 different highways are being worked on that feed into this town, and the road, they're going to repair the road. It's going to go through its wear and tear. Then the construction crew is going to have to go back in there and do construction again. But even when that road is worn down, you can still drive. You can still drive on it with a bike. You can drive on it with a car, with a truck, with a semi. You can still drive on it just like you normally would. It just might be a little bumpier. You might have to watch out for potholes. Then the construction crew comes back in. That's usually, yeah. Then the construction crew comes back in, fixes everything, and then the road's good to go. Good to go again. You don't always have to have a knee replaced if you have bone bone. You do not always have to have a meniscectomy where they go in and clean out the meniscus, or have a meniscus repair if you have a torn meniscus on your MRI, in the event that you just woke up with knee pain one day. Again, if you have a traumatic injury where you fell and twisted, or you got knocked into, or something happens and you tear an ACL or you tear a meniscus, that might constitute some sort of surgical intervention. Or that might constitute some sort of imaging just to know what's going on, to rule out anything else serious. But if you're waking up with low back pain or neck pain or knee pain or ankle pain or hip pain, and the first thing that you want done is an image, that is generally the wrong thing, the wrong route to take, because it's going to take you longer to see a physiotherapist. It's going to take you longer to get in an exercise routine, and it's going to take you longer, or it's going to cost you more money in the long run to go down the imaging route first and then start to see a physio. We are trained in diagnosing musculoskeletal injuries, and if it's not, then we can refer out to the appropriate provider. But seeing a physical therapist first is cheaper in the long run, and it generally gets people better quicker. Clinical bottom line, as far as injury goes, if you had some sort of traumatic event, or some sort of event that led to the injury, probably a good idea to go in and get it done. If you just woke up one day and it started to bug you, probably not the best idea to go get an image, because you've got something that's going to pop up. Like I said, 88% of 6-year-olds have disc degeneration. You're going to have something pop up on an image. You don't need to know. Go see a therapist to get on an exercise routine, or modify your current exercise program so that way you're on the path to recovery. You're not on the path of waiting, the wait and see game. The other thing I want to talk about is the need to just rest it. So just resting it is generally the exact opposite of what you need to do. People will deal with ankle sprains, knee sprains, hamstring strains, shoulder issues for years and years and years, because they just rested it. They stopped what they were doing, and they avoided doing anything that really hurt it. And then they got older, they got weaker, and the condition never really resolved. Just resting it is the wrong approach to take for a few different reasons. One, the tissue that is stressed, whether it's a ligament, muscle, tendon, whatever, what you did was too much load. Our tissues are built, or are like bridges. Bridges are meant for a certain load. You exceed that load, the bridge fails. The construction crew, again, goes back in there, fixes it, the bridge is good to go. When the body goes through that same process, say you're drawing your bow back and you start to develop shoulder pain. Well, that load, whatever was led up to that, it might not have been that one singular draw back, but it might have been the other, like the 20 or 30 other shots, or the things that you did the day before, like the yard work that you did the day before, that led to that tissue being loaded. It wasn't adequately able to recover from that prior stress, and now symptoms have started to come to fruition. The construction crew is now your weight room, because that's truly the only way to develop tissue resiliency. But that construction crew comes in, it gets that tissue stronger, makes that tendon stronger, it makes that ligament stronger, and then you can go back to doing what you were doing before. But you cannot just rest it, because just resting it does not make that tissue any more resilient to the stress that's going to be applied to it. It's going to get weaker. It's going to become less resilient. And now you can't do what you want to do. So as resistant as you might be to the weight room truly is the only place that you can build true tissue resiliency by lifting heavy weights, lifting moderately heavy weights, and lifting light weights. It's the only way to build true tissue resiliency. So that way, when injuries occur, you heal quicker, and or you prevent injuries from happening, because they're already used to being stressed in the weight room. And now the things that you do with everyday life, or the things that you do with hunting, backpacking, that sort of stuff, it's not that much of a strain on the tissue, and it can handle it when you start to increase the load with your hobbies, because the weight room and your training has adequately prepared your body for that stuff. So if you have any questions, let me know. Again, let's go clinical bottom line. Imaging it, unless you had some sort of acute onset, or some sort of acute trauma, or some sort of incident that led to an injury, imaging usually is not the first option to go with, or should not be your first option to go with. Go down the conservative route first, get on the path of exercise, get on the path of recovery. And then if that doesn't change anything, then that your physical therapist can send you out to the appropriate provider. And you don't just need to rest it, you need to stress it. You need to get that tissue stronger, you need to get that tissue more resilient, so that way you can get back to doing what you love to do quicker, and without compensation. All right, guys, have a good night, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Hey, thank you for tuning in to the Wilderness Fitness Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please head over to your podcast app and consider leaving a review. If you think a friend or a family member may benefit from listening to this podcast, please consider sharing this episode with them. We appreciate your help in the growth of this podcast. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for even more content, and the weekly Hump Day Q&A, where you can get all of your human performance, rehab, women's health, and injury prevention questions answered. If you're interested in getting hooked up with even more content from Wilderness PT from the comfort of your own home, head over to wildernessphysicaltherapy.com and get signed up for the Spike Camp membership. This is where you'll have access to prior seminars and a workout that'll have you in shape each fall, designed by yours truly. Since you're there, check out the mid-month media newsletter that goes out 1 to 2 times a month, which includes a variety of topics with the most recent research on health and human performance. You can sign up by hovering over the free resources section and subscribe to any of the free guides, or simply sign up under the mid-month media newsletter tab.